sinking in sand? Are you walking on water, or are you sinking in sand? Are you walking on water? Are you sinking in sand? You see the heavenly Father said, let the sun redeem man.
Hello, all you happy people. This is Alan again with The Building. Wanted to come in and do another Bible study today. I know that the last video we went through and kind of dove deeper, covering chapters 4 through 11, I think it was. So today we're going to go ahead and dive a little bit deeper into 12 and 13, which I covered in the last Bible study, following this path. And then hopefully we'll make it into 14 today. So without further ado, let's get started. Again, I'm reading from the King James, so if you have that, if you have your Bible, whatever version you use, if you have that, go ahead and get that open. Turn to chapter 12. So again, I want to dive deeper into this because there's so much to study, and I know that last one I kind of went and just skimmed through it, talked about a few different things that just instantly stood out. But I didn't really go through my notes that I had taken on these chapters. So I want to go ahead and do that, just so you can get a full picture of what's going on. So if you flip over to Acts chapter 7, like I talked about, well, let's go ahead and do it. Acts chapter 7, verse 2. And he said, Men, brethren, and fathers, hearken. The God of glory appeared unto our father Abraham, when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Charan, and said unto him, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and come into the land which I shall show thee. Then he came out of the land of the Chaldeans, and dwelt in Charan. And from thence, when his father was dead, he removed him into this land, wherein ye now dwell. So when you read the first verse of chapter 12, this is a play after chapter 11, obviously. But we see that it says, now the Lord had said. So this means that he already told Abraham this, and he was still telling him these things over the years. Nobody knows how long he had been telling him these things. Although you see that in the last chapter, he talks about where he was in Ur of the Chaldees, and then now it says, he's telling him, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. So then you get down to verse 4, and it says, So then Abram departed. So it was after his father died. So he waited until his father died, and then he finally listened and went on. Whether this was actually out of rebellion to what God was telling him, I don't know. However, we know that Abram was an idolatrous, his whole family, and even some of the older writings say that his father Terah was an idol maker. So this is their background. So, imagine where you were if you didn't have the line of, believers in your family. Maybe you're the first in your family that is a believer. Can you imagine going to your family and saying, hey, look, this is wrong, what we're doing. I'm going to start following this God. And they're like, oh, are you crazy? You could just hear what these naysayers would be saying to you. So whether he just prolonged, because even though God appeared to him, or was giving him this vision, he wasn't quite sure. He still was kind of doubting. But we know that after his death, his father's death, he finally says, okay, that's it, I'm leaving. Then you can see through this chapter 12, in verse 4, verse 6, verse 8, and verse 9, where he departed, he passed through, he removed from there, from thence, he journeyed. So we can see that this is a man on the move. God said that he will show him the place. So he doesn't know where he's going, but he just knows that, okay, this is the real God, this is the true God. I'm just going to be on the move until God tells me to stop. So in verse 6, you can see that, and Abram passed through the land unto the place of Sychem, just leave it at that, unto the plain of Moreh, and the Canaanite was then in the land. So this is the cursed people that we learned about in chapter 9. Then we move on to verse 7. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, Unto thy seed. So remember, at this point, Abram still doesn't have any kids. Sarai is barren, and so he doesn't have any children, and yet God is still telling him that unto your seed. But I think it's important to note that as soon as it mentions the Canaanites was in that land, then we have the first mention of the word appeared, possibly because of the Canaanites. So they knew, if you do your research on the Canaanites, they were just a wicked people. And so when Abram came to this land and he saw that the Canaanites were there, he was probably worried and a little bit scared for his family and even for himself. So this is the first time that God actually appears to Abram and shows him that comfort. So then we move over to, so we look here at verse 7, and there he builded an altar unto the Lord. And then you move on to verse 8, and it says again, so he's moving and moving and moving, and then you get to verse 8, and he built an altar unto the Lord. So everywhere he goes, when he does stop, he builds an altar unto the Lord. So he's staying in constant communication with God here through all this. Because when he said back in verse 12, chapter 12, verse 1, unto a land that I will show thee. So what God's basically telling him at this point is get started and stay in communication here, stay in contact, because I will be showing you this on your travels. So everywhere he goes, he's staying in communication with God. He's building these altars, and he's doing this sacrificing. And in verse 8, you see he's calling upon the name of the Lord. And so, he's trying to stay in communication here. However, even though we think we're on the right path, or we know that we're on the right path that God is leading us down, doesn't mean that things naturally in the world isn't going to try to stop us. So what we find here is that he calls upon the name of the Lord, and by verse 10, there was a famine in the land. So even though he knows, he's building his faith, he's starting off as a baby in Christ. And so as his faith grows, he's got to go through some tests and some trials. So then you get on to verse 10, or let's just go ahead and go to verse 8. Back to verse 8, I should say. And pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west and Hai on the east. So Bethel means house of God, and Hai means house of ruin. So he's in our travels, all through life, we have those places where we are at, where we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, between the house of God and a house of ruin. And so sometimes we walk that fine line between the two, and we really have to choose. So Abram at this point is parked right in the middle of these two places. So then we get on to verse 10. There was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt. This is the first time that Egypt is mentioned in the Bible. Mitzrayim is Hebrew for Egypt. That's what they call it. So we did hear Mitzrayim, the name of the person, where the Egyptians come from, but this is the first time that the word Egypt is used. So in 12:8, Abram calls on the name of the Lord, and in 10, there's a famine. So this is that test that I was talking about. Then we move on to verse 12, and so it says, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. So through all the studies and archaeological discoveries and things like that, they know that even these ancient civilizations knew that adultery was wrong. So instead of committing adultery, they would just kill the person's husband and take the wife, because now she was single. So it's just a very corrupt and wicked people back in those civilizations. Although they had certain morals, they knew adultery was wrong, they just circumvented that and okay, well, let's kill the husband and take her anyways, because now she's single. So then we get on to, let's see, verse 13. He says, say, I pray thee, that thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake. So, if you want good things, tell him this, so that way it'll be good for me, but for your sake, because I'm your husband. And my soul shall live because of thee. So already right here, he went away from where God was wanting him to go. He went into Egypt, and so God is dealing with him, but instead of keeping his faith in God, now he's putting his faith in his wife, saying, it would be good because of thee I will live, not because of God, but because of thee. So you can already see where it's taken his eyes off of God. Okay, so let's move on to verse 16. And he had treated Abram, so this is the Pharaoh now, he had treated Abram well for her sake. So because she was so beautiful and he wanted to be with her, now he's taking care of her quote-unquote brother at this point, and he gave him sheep, oxen, he-asses, men servants, maid servants, she-asses, and camels. So he's just piling on these riches onto Abraham. Oh, this is your sister? Okay, we're going to take great care of you. You brought her through the land, you took care of her, so now we're going to take care of you. So you can see that his assets are increasing at this point. Sarai is about 65 at this point. So imagine a 65-year-old woman today, while she may still be beautiful, I don't want to discredit anybody out there. Normally by 65, people aren't really going around saying, man, did you see that woman? She's 65. Is that like, how we say, 30 is the new 50 or whatever? Did she look like she was 30? Did she look like she was 35? We don't know. But at 65 years old, she's this beautiful woman. And so we can see that. But this also proves with these verses, where he's telling her to claim that she's his sister, that beauty can be a blessing, but it can also be a curse. Because of her beauty, the Pharaoh wanted her, so Abram's being blessed, not necessarily through God, but the Pharaoh is blessing Abraham, but it's also a curse because now he has to lie. He has to tell his wife to lie for their sake. So it's a blessing and a curse there. Then you get through, let's look at verse 18. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this that thou hast done unto me? Why didst thou not tell me that she was thy wife? Verse 19, why saidst thou, she is my sister? So I might have taken her to be my wife. So now, therefore, behold thy wife, take her and go away. As believers, sometimes it's the hardest to take the truth from an unbeliever. I can't tell you how many times in my life that I've been in situations where they're like, hang on a second, you're doing this, but yet you call yourself a Christian? That doesn't seem right. And here, these are unbelievers calling me out over my own faith. We get to these points in our lives where those are the comments that are made to us that sting the most. And it just shows you right here, even with Abram, here's this man of God, this man of faith, and he's being pointed at, hang on a second, you did this to me. Why did you do this to me? Why? What? And so those are the comments that are being made to Abram here, and I'm guarantee you that they were stinging him hard. And then you see that he leaves right afterwards. So then we move on to chapter 13, verse 3. And he went on his journeys from the south, even to Bethel, unto the place where his tent had been at the beginning. So now you can see that he was trying to make some good moves and it ended up right back where he started at. And I guarantee we can all have some testimony to that, being true in our own lives, that, take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. It constantly seems like we're trying to do the right thing and we just end up right back at the beginning where we started. But the amazing thing is here in verse 12, that unto the place of the altar, and he called on the name of the Lord again. So even though he went astray, he was doing his own thing. He went into the land of Egypt, trying to flee some bad circumstances. Instead of just continuing to have faith and relying on God, he decided to take the matters into his own hands. He went to where it looked better. Grass is greener on the other side type of thing. Turned out bad situation for him. And so now God brought him back to the beginning, back to the altar, back to calling on his name. And then we see where the story leads. Then we get to verse number 7. You see that there was a strife, a family dispute. Verse 8 is where Abram is showing his maturity. Is letting Lot, hey, look, you look around you, take whatever place you want, and I will take whatever, you don't choose. Verse 10, we see, and Lot lifted up his eyes. So Lot's looking around, and he sees the pleasures of the lust of pleasures. Oh, look at that land over there. That land is great. I'll take that one for myself. So it's that covetousness. It's that, just not thinking about his here Abraham's being nice. And he's saying, look, take whatever you want. So instead of Lot saying, okay, if you're giving me that kind of choice, why don't I go over here? It's a good area. Might not be the best, but it's a good area. I can settle over there. No, he wants to take the best for himself. So that's where we see that Lot lifted up his eyes, that pride of life, the lust of pleasures, lust of life. And so that's where he starts heading off. Then you see also in verse 10, even as the garden of the Lord. So it's apparent that they're still talking about this Garden of Eden, even though we're after the flood now. The stories are still continuing through the lines, and so they know that this is like, it's not exact because the Lord's not there, but it's like the garden, and like the land of Egypt. So they were in the land of Egypt, because Lot was with Abram through all this time. Excuse me. And so it was like the land of Egypt. It had even when we get into the story of the Israelites coming out of Egypt, they said, please, you took us into the desert to kill us. We could have just stayed there. And they had all these pleasures. They had all these herbs and spices and, things like that. So they were looking back at all the glories that the world can offer us. And that's what appealed to Lot at this point. So Lot is longing for the pleasure of the natural mind that we see in verse 12, because he comes and he pitched his tent toward Sodom. So he's longing for that Sodom. He's not quite there yet. We'll see how he does finally move into Sodom. He sets up his tents there, or his family in Sodom. He becomes part of the government in Sodom. But at this point, he's only setting up his tent towards Sodom. So he's facing Sodom. He's looking at it. He's longing for that. He's like, man, I'm going to make it there one day. I'm going to get that Lamborghini one day. I'm going to get that palace or that fancy house one day. And he's longing for that. Instead of following Abraham's faith and relying on God, he's longing for those earthly pleasures, those lusts of the world. And then in verse 13, the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners. So they knew this. They knew that they weren't good people over there. But still Lot was like, but look what they have. I want those things. I want those pleasures of life. But so we all get to that point in our lives where we're looking at this, well, it won't happen to me. I won't let my mind be corrupted by that. I'll go over in that bar. I'll have a couple beers maybe, but I'm not going to get drunk. Don't worry about it. I'm not like that. That's not going to happen to me. And then before long, one moves on to number 5. And now we're stumbling out to, our cars. And we wake up the next morning saying, well, what the heck happened? I didn't mean to do that. Oh, I didn't mean to get drunk. Well, that's what happens, though. When you start to let a little bit sneak in, a whole lot takes over. And that's just our natural part of us. We can't even allow those little bits of things to pop in, those pleasures to start to corrupt us will just completely take over. So now we move on to verse 14. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him. Sometimes God has to separate us from our family, from our friends, from people in general, spouses or whatever, because they're corrupting us. They will end up taking us in a place that God doesn't want us to be. And sometimes it's because of those separations that God can really open our eyes and reveal to us what he wants for our lives. And then you see, lift up now thine eyes. So God is telling him, so Abram's head is kind of hung at this point because Lot has left and he knows where Lot's headed. So he says, now lift up thine eyes. That word now there is hard for the translators to come across because it's actually the Lord saying the word please. Lift up now, lift up please thine eyes. And it's hard for them to understand how the Lord would beg in a way, a human. But it's not. It's kind of like as a father, I warn my kids, don't touch the stove, don't touch the stove, don't touch the stove. It's hot, it's hot, it's hot. And they still do it. Now will you listen? That kind of thing. Please, will you listen? It's that begging, that longing. Please, will you listen to me? Now will you listen to me? I warned you what was going to happen. I warned you about these things. Now will you listen to me? Please, will you listen to me? But he says, lift up now thine eyes and look from the place where thou art, northward and southward, eastward and westward. We get into a point in our lives where we're so focused on what's next, or we get into a point of even looking at where we're at. Oh man, I'm in this dead end job. I've got a broken down vehicle. My house is falling apart. Man, I can't wait to buy a home. I'm still renting this house. We just constantly want to look at where we're at instead of looking at what we already have. And I think that's a mindset that we're so focused on trying to do the next best thing, instead of just looking at where we're at and being happy and content with what we have in our lives and the blessings that God has currently given us. Now, as far as Abram goes, if he's in this spot and he steps out of his tent and God's telling him to look north, look south, look west, look east. North for him at this point is towards his past. That's where he came from, because it said that he was traveling south. So we know that if he looks north, he's seeing his past. He's seeing the idolatrous ways of his family. He's seeing his old idolatrous ways. And he doesn't necessarily want to go back that way. When he looks south, that's into the land of Egypt. So he can see his mistakes. He can see his rebellion against God. He can see where, he went on his own way. He backslid a little bit and God brought him back to the altar. If he looks east, he sees where Lot went to Sodom, lust of pleasure. And if he looks to the west, now he's looking, and I'm doing this. I know this is my right and this is my left, but I'm doing this for your viewing. But so west is this way for me, east is this way for me. You get it. But west is Bethel, the house of God. It's the future. It's where God's leading his people. And so he's right dab in the middle of all of it, and he's able to look around, and he's actually able to see from where he's at. He can see his past, he can see his mistakes, he can see where God has brought him, he can see the lusts of the world over there, but he can also see God's house over here. So it's just a beautiful spot to be put in. And I think that we need to do that in our lives as well, as just stop looking at where you're at now, but look from where you're at. Look where God has been in your past. Look where all the different situations where God has put you in or allowed you to go through, but then brought you out of those, and look where he's leading you now. Just a beautiful story. So 13, verse 16, it says, and I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. So even though Abram at this point had, was listening to God, but then waited for his father to die, then he moved on. Then he sees a famine. Oh my gosh, now I got to do something else. So he moves on to Egypt. And then things happen in Egypt, and now he's being brought back here. So even though he still has a little bit of rebellion in him, a little bit of backsliding in him, things like that, God's promise still remains. I will, even though you're doing these things, and I have to continually work with you, I'm still going to give you these things. I'm still going to bless your seeds. Abram still doesn't have kids at this point. So there's still going to be that thought in his mind of, okay, what is God talking about? I know he's making me this promise, but how is it going to come about? Verse 18, then Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. So he's coming back and he's building an altar, and he's on the move again, but he's building an altar to the Lord. Mamre means strength, and Hebron means fellowship. So now he's coming up to a place of strength and of fellowship with God. It's just a beautiful scene that he's being put in here. Okay, so let's move on to so the story here in chapter 14. I don't think we covered 14 yet. So let's go ahead and jump into this. And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elazar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations. If I mispronounce these, sorry, you probably won't know either, so just follow along. That these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and Bera means son of evil. And with and with Birsha, king of Gomorrah. So you got Bera and Birsha. Beer only leads to bad things. Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar, or Zor. All these were joined together in the vale of Siddim, which is the Salt Sea. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. And in the 14th year came Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephaims. This is a tribe of giants. Now, let me finish this verse real quick, and then we're going to jump over to Deuteronomy. But in Ashtoreth, Carneum, I don't know, and the Zuzims, or Zuzims in Ham, and the Emims in Shaveh, Kiriathim. So let's turn over to Deuteronomy chapter 2, and we are going to read verses 2 through 10. I'm sorry, 10 through 20. And the Emims dwelt therein in times past. So let's start in verse 9. And the Lord said unto me, distress not the Moabites, neither contend with them in battle. For I will not give thee of their land for a possession, because I have given Ar unto the children of Lot for a possession. The Emims dwelt therein in times past, a great people great, and many and tall, as the Anakims, which also were accounted giants, as the Anakins, but the Moabites call them Emims. The Horims also dwelt in Seir before time, but the children of Esau succeeded them, when they had destroyed them from before them, and dwelt in their stead. And Israel did unto the land of his possessions, which the Lord gave unto them. Now rise up, said I, and get you over the brook Zered. And we went over the brook of Zered. And the space in which we came from Kadesh Barnea until we were come over the brook Zered was 38 years, until all the generation of the men of war were wasted out from among the host, as the Lord sware unto them. For indeed the hand of the Lord was against them, to destroy them from among the host, until they were consumed. So it came to pass, when all the men of war were consumed and dead from among the people, that the Lord spake unto me, saying, Thou art to pass over through Ar, the coast of Moab, this day. That's the place where they get the jeeps. And when thou comest nigh over against the children of Ammon, distress them not, nor meddle with them, for I will not give thee of the land of the children of Ammon any possession, because I have given it unto the children of Lot for a possession. That also was accounted a land of giants. Giants dwelt therein in old time, and the Ammonites call them Zamzumims. So we see here back in Genesis chapter 4, the Rephaims and the Zamzumims are giants. So we still have the giants in the land. So they are all coming together. And the Horites and their mount, verse 6, and the Horites and their mount Seir unto Elparan, which is by the wilderness. And they returned and came to En-Mishpat, which is Kadesh, and smote all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites that dwelt in Hazazon Tamar, And there went out the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, the same as Zor, and they joined battle with them in the vale of Siddim, with Lamer, the king of Elam, and with Tidal, king of nations, and Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings with 5. So now you've got 4 kings against 5 kings. So basically, what they did was, let's see if I have the note here. Okay, yes. So the kings went around Sodom and Gomorrah. So they were trying to attack Sodom and Gomorrah, but instead of going right towards Sodom and Gomorrah, they went around and knocked out all their allies. That's what's happening here. So then that's when the other kings come out of Sodom and Gomorrah and start doing this battle. And so it's 4 kings against 5 kings at this point. Okay. So in the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits or tar pits. And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there. And they that remained fled to the mountain. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all of their victuals and went their way. And they took Lot, Abram's brother or nephew, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. And there came one that had escaped. Okay, so let's go back to verse 12 real quick. And they took Lot, who dwelt in Sodom. So now we just saw that Lot had pointed his tent towards Sodom, but now he's actually moved into Sodom. So he's just making his way. You know, that little bit leads you to a lot. You know, that one beer will lead you to a 6-pack. You just got to be real careful with your life choices. That won't happen to me, but sure enough, it does. So we saw that, okay, I'll just point my tent towards that. I'm longing for this. And now I'm finally in that city. Okay. So we saw that Lot has now moved into Sodom. There came one that had escaped. So only one man escaped this war and told Abram the Hebrew. So this is the first time we have the word Hebrew, which are nomads. For he dwelt in the plain of Mamre, and the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, and brother of Aner, or Aner. And these were confederate with Abram. So it doesn't say that Abram was confederate with them, but these were confederate with Abram. So they were okay with Abram living there. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. So now we have armed servants, and servants isn't a derogatory term. You know, it says all through a few other times throughout the Bible that, you know, these people, if they wanted to stay because, you know, they owed somebody a debt, so they became a worker or a servant for this person. You know, if they were treated well, you know, they would say, open my ear. And so they would actually go over to the doorpost and they would put an aug through their ear and put it like a piercing through it and have a piercing. And that was them showing that, you know, I love this person. This person's taking great care of me. I want to be a servant to this person. Even Jesus makes a reference to open my ear, Lord. So it's not a bad thing being a servant. You know, this person's taking care of them. They're working for them. You know, it's like if I bought a large plot of land and I had family and friends or whatever move in, and we all work together on the land to take care of the sheep or take care of the goats or take care of the crops or whatever. You know, it's my land. So ultimately, I would have the final say, I would assume. Now, not getting into mags and all this different stuff where you have elders and things. But, you know, I bought the property. So it would ultimately be my say on what's going on. But we're all working together as a team. So these people are working for the benefit, you know, we're all working for the benefit of all the people. However, they would be considered kind of like my servants of my land. But you kind of see the reference there. Almost done. Hold up. I know we're a little over 30 minutes. So he's got these trained servants. So Abram was prepared. He had servants that were military, that were trained for the military. And he was able to go and take care of this. Born in his house 318, and pursued them in a Dan. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and smote them, and pursued them unto Hobab, which is on the left of Damascus. So he attacked them by night. So, sticking with the day and age, here these people are having this big war during the day. They go back to their camp at night. They're getting drunk. They're hooting and hollering, whatever. They're passing out, whatever. And that's when Abraham comes in and attacks. It's the best line of attack is at night. Topic for another video on the prepping side. Get yourself some night vision, because if you can see at night and they can't, you are at the advantage. And he brought back all the goods, and also brought again his brother Lot and his goods, and the women also, and the people. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return. So he's kind of waiting. Abraham returns, and then he goes out to meet him. From the slaughter of Chedorlaomer, and of the kings that were with him, and the valley of Sheba, which is the king's dale. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High. So, if we look at, Melchizedek, just on a side note, some say that he is Shem. We don't really have any evidence of that, but that's kind of what people have alleged to, and we're going to end there as far as our study goes. We will pick up probably again with verse 18 when we start over with the next Bible study. But one thing I wanted to point out is the story of Lot here taking place. Lot's getting himself into trouble. He sets up, he leaves his uncle. He takes the better of the area. He's heading towards Sodom. Then he moves into Sodom. And he's getting himself into problems. And now, this war's going on, and they take him captive, and his family, and all of his possessions, and they take him captive. And so God, as a saving grace, sends Abram, who's already prepared, who God has blessed to be prepared, sends him in there, fights this battle, gets his nephew back, brings all of his stuff out, comes back to the land. Well, we know from the story, if you've read ahead or if you just know the story, that Lot ends up back in Sodom and Gomorrah again. How many times has God sent a saving grace? Look, Alan, you're in drugs again. You're doing this again. Come on, let's get you out of this. And then we turn around and we end up right back into the drugs again, or we end up right back into the alcohol again, or we end up right back into a bad relationship again. Instead of just having faith and relying on God to lead us in the direction that we're supposed to be going, we just follow our own lusts, we follow our own pleasures, and we end up right back in the situations that we were already in, where God has to come in and send his saving grace once again, just to bring us back out. So I hope this teaching has blessed you. I hope the study has blessed you, whatever you want to call it. I still don't know what to call it. But I hope you get something from this. I hope you can see how this relates to our lives, even 2,000 years ago. Because back in chapter 11, that's been a 2,000-year period from the creation to Abraham is 2,000 years. So we've covered 2,000 years. So now from chapter 12 till the New Testament is another 2,000 years. So we've covered a long period of time just in a short period of book. And then we cover a long period of time over the next, many books until we get to the New Testament. But I hope you enjoy these. Hit the like, hit the subscribe, share these videos with your friends and family. I hope you're taking notes. I hope that you're studying this, and I hope you find this applicable to your own life. Some of these stories that we're covering in the book. All right, I love you guys. Take care. Shalom.